So I'm Sophie, I'm from Warwickshire in England, and I was diagnosed with stage 4 bowel cancer in 2018, so nearly 6 years ago. I have 2 kids and am married. The kids are now 9 and 12 years old, and I currently work in motorsport. And yeah, I've been in remission. Well, I've been off treatment now for nearly 3 years. So currently cancer-free still. So the first time I noticed something was wrong, it was a Monday night, and I went up to bed and I was just sick all of a sudden, like vomited when I was going to bed. And that was the first thing I noticed, because there was no reason for me to be sick. Like, we hadn't had any takeaway, we hadn't been out for the weekend. There was nothing suspicious I'd eaten, so it just seemed a bit off to me. And then it didn't happen again until like a week later, or maybe near the weekend, and then it happened again. And I was like, this is a bit strange, because it was just like a single occasion both times, and then it happened again the next week, but it was coming out both ends this time, so I thought maybe I'd eaten something bad. But the following week I then went to my doctor, because I just felt like something wasn't right. It didn't seem normal. I wasn't vomiting loads like it was a bug or anything. And so I went to the doctor, and she just thought, okay, well, we'll run some blood tests and go from there. So I had some bloods taken, and she called me like the next day and told me that I was so anemic. She wondered how I was still walking, because I was almost to the point where I needed a blood transfusion. So yeah, that's literally the only thing I noticed up until that point, was just being sick. And so, but they reckon by that point that obviously the tumour had got so big by that point that it was stopping the food going down. So before that, I hadn't noticed anything. And to be honest, I hadn't noticed that I was anemic, because my son at the time, he was just 2, and he wasn't a good sleeper in the first place. So I was just always tired anyway. So yeah, that was it really. And luckily I had a great GP, and she had just started working at the practice. I didn't know this. And she wanted to kind of get to the bottom of things, because she was like, oh, okay, this was kind of interesting to her. So she was willing to go a bit of an extra mile for me. So it was good in that sense. Yeah, I didn't have any typical symptoms, unfortunately. So that kind of led us down a different path of thinking it was some stomach issue. And she referred me. First of all, we tried doing like an elimination diet of foods, because thought it might be an intolerance or something. She referred me to have an endoscopy, which showed nothing. And yeah, we just did all kinds of things really. But that was it for my first symptoms, really, for the first few months. June was when I actually got diagnosed, of 2018. So my symptoms started in like the August before, and so I got diagnosed the next June. So 10 months. It wasn't until the February, so I'd been going to see her for like 6 months at this point. In February we went to Disneyland Paris, and I remember being so not poorly, but my stomach was so bad at that point, and I was getting like bouts of diarrhea. Nothing like consistent, but when we were there, my stomach was in a lot of pain. I was getting a lot of pains, and it looked like not blood, but it looked red when I went to the toilet. It wasn't bloody. So when I got back from the trip, I went and talked to her and told her this. I actually went to see us for something else, and I was like, "Oh yeah, by the way, I noticed this when we were away." And she's like, "Oh, okay, now I can refer you to the inflammatory bowel clinic." Because she said now it's moving towards that. It might be something like Crohn's or colitis. So that's kind of when things actually started to go in the right direction. So she had to, over here it takes a while for the referrals to go through. So that was like February. I didn't see him until April, May time. And then he was convinced it was Crohn's disease. So he's like, right, let's just get all these tests done so we can wrap it up, and be just like, right, we've done all these, get them out of the way. Yeah, it's confirmed, so then we can move on, because normally they'll do one test and like rule it out, that kind of thing. So he ordered me to have colonoscopy and an MRI, all at the same time. So that ended up being in June. I had like the colonoscopy on Friday, and then MRI on the Monday. By this point, I was getting really bad, like with my stomach pains. I couldn't really eat much, because I just wasn't keeping anything down. Then obviously you have to do like these awful diets before them. What was they called? I can't remember. Like a low residue diet is called. And as I've been a vegetarian since I was 21, so like 15 years before this, I was vegetarian. So that was another reason why my doctor was like, well, red meat is like a big thing in bowel cancer. So they, didn't think it was anything to do with that. So yeah, I basically could only eat like white bread and cheese before this, the colonoscopy, and then I had to carry on again for the MRI. And during the colonoscopy, it was like so painful. I didn't realize what was going on at the time because I had a lot of drugs, gas and air and stuff. Because it was painful, they kept giving me more, and they, like, I could see it on the screen. I didn't know what I was looking at, but they kind of stopped, and I knew something looked different on the screen. But they're like, "Oh, there's a lesion there, and we can't get the camera past it. So you'll just have to talk to your doctor." And I was like, "Okay." I didn't know what lesion meant. I just thought it was like to me, a lesion's like a cut or something, right? So then so then I started Googling it, and I was like, lesion and bowel cancer. I was like, it can't be that. Like, I was just like, it wasn't in my head at all. It's not going to be bowel cancer. So they didn't actually tell me at the time of the colonoscopy what it was. Then I waited for the MRI, and by that point, I was really sick at that point. And they called me up the next day after that and said, "Oh, I need to have a CT scan before I see the doctor on Thursday." And I just thought that's another thing that he's done. Oh, we just need to get that done. And at that point, I had to ask my husband to come with me because he hadn't, at no point had we been thinking it was cancer. So no one had told me to bring him with me, or anything like that. And he came with me because I just couldn't physically move because I was so sick at the time. And so luckily he happened to be with me so I had my CT scan. We literally walked to the IBD doctor, and that's when he told us that it was cancer. So luckily he just happened to be there for that because they didn't tell me to bring him. So to be honest, it was a massive shock for it to be cancer because I was relieved in thinking it was Crohn's disease. So it was I guess it was a relief in some way to have some kind of, oh, okay, there is definitely something wrong with you. Just didn't want it to be that, really. And because that the IBD specialist is not, it wasn't his area of expertise, and he hadn't really had to give that kind of news before. I don't think he handled it in the best way, because he didn't really know how to say it, and it was just like delivered in quite a shocking way. So it wasn't really so much relief in that instance, because it was kind of not handled too well, I guess, because it wasn't an oncologist, so it wasn't very sensitive, I guess. So after I got the diagnosis, I was then told that I'd be assigned an oncologist and have I don't know if you guys have it over there too, like an MDT, multidisciplinary team, I think. They were going to meet with me about me the next week and then come up with a plan. So I didn't get to speak to my oncologist until the week after. And then he said, right, you're having surgery first, because the tumor was so large at that point, it was almost cutting off my bowel. And that's why I was being sick, and it was just, nothing was getting through. So he said, in order for you to like get through any chemo, we're going to have to get rid of this first. And so that happened the week after that. So about, I think it was like 10 days from when I was actually told I had cancer to having the surgery. And so that was a bowel right hemicolectomy, it's called. And then I was in the hospital for about a week, because they had to, it was quite messy, they said, messy spread. It like spread back towards my spine. It like wrapped around blood vessels. They removed a few lymph nodes. They had to cut off some of my stomach too, because it actually attached itself to my stomach. So it was quite a rough recovery, to be honest. Yeah, and then after that, I was told so that I'd be put on the strongest chemo they could throw at it, basically, because of my age and I could handle it. Because I had the surgery, they were able to do a biopsy, and they found out that I had a BRAF mutation, which is very aggressive, and it's got the worst prognosis, really, of a bowel cancer diagnosis. But because of that, they could also add another type of chemo into my chemotherapy. So BRAF mutation, so I wasn't told much about it, apart from it being very aggressive, and that basically you shouldn't Google it, which of course I did. And the average, like the median survival rate is 8 to 12 months once you've been diagnosed with this. And basically, my doctor didn't know anyone who survived having the BRAF mutation. So that's basically what I know about it. It's just known as not having good survivor statistics, especially back then. So this was obviously 6 years ago, but more recently, a lot of people are, living a lot longer with it, because they're finding out lots of different treatments for it. But yeah, it's still not a great diagnosis, unfortunately. I had a portacath fitted, because they said the chemo was too strong for me to have in my veins. So I had that done about 3 weeks after my surgery, and then a week after that I started my chemo. So a month after the surgery. So chemotherapy, the chemotherapy I was put on is called FOLFOXIRI, which is a combination of FOLFIRI and oxaliplatin. It was really rough on me. I would have to go into hospital, and I'd be there having an infusion for about, I think it started off about 6 hours being at the hospital in the chair. And then I would come home with a pump attached to me, and that would stay on for the next 48 hours before I then would go back and have it removed. During those 48 hours, I was horribly sick, and it was the side effects from this chemo cumulative. So the first cycle wasn't too bad, but I was sick a lot. I mean, I'd also just had bowel surgery, so they were kind of expecting that, and had bad diarrhea. I was very tired all the time, and it progressed. I got worse. They would reduce the amount of chemo I was getting, and they also extended my time. So it ended up being, I was at the hospital on the IV for 8 hours, and then doing the 48 hours after. So I'd be there all day, and I lost my appetite. I lost my taste of things. The oxaliplatin also gave me neuropathy, so I couldn't put my hands. My feet weren't so bad for some reason, but my hands. Also, I was having chemo over winter here, so my hands were just like needles and on fire. I couldn't put it in the fridge or do anything like that. And chemo, I mean, honestly, it was just the most horrific thing I've had to go through. I lost a lot of weight. I was probably about, let me see, in pounds, probably about 40 or 50 pounds lighter than I am now. I just couldn't eat anything. I was probably surviving by the end of it. I was just living off these little nutrition drinks that we get, because I couldn't even stomach milkshakes. So it was just like fruity water that I was drinking. And I couldn't, like, nothing tasted like anything. It's like bread and pizza. That was just like, it was like chewing cardboard to me. So I just didn't eat. I had such bad brain fog too that I couldn't even talk to people anymore, because I would literally try and say something, but I would forget what I was saying mid-sentence. And also I was so exhausted that I just couldn't be bothered to like even try to correct myself. I would sleep most of the time. So my kids at the time were 3 and 6. And so my daughter was at school, but my son was at nursery, and they were lovely enough to take him on for additional hours, so I could take him there, and then I would sleep all day. Yeah, so basically the 2 days I had the pump at home, I would not be able to keep anything in my body. By the end of it, it was coming out both ends horrendously. I couldn't leave the house because I just had to be near a toilet all the time because I was going to be sick or something. And yeah, I couldn't even drink water at the end, because it was just like everything was being rejected. I didn't lose my hair. My hair did thin quite a bit, but I didn't actually lose it. But I lost a lot of like muscle. I just kind of like melted away really, and I just became really weak and like an old lady, and it was just horrible because I couldn't do anything for myself, and I couldn't look after my kids, and that was the hardest thing. What I wish I'd known was, I guess, that to know that it affects everyone differently, because I just had, especially if you go on social media, you would see these people like dancing around their chemo pole and that kind of thing, and I was just like, I can't even stand up, let alone, I couldn't even like hold my phone to make a video or take a photo of like, to try and, like, I don't have many memories, like physical memories or recordings or anything like that time, because I was just asleep all the time. And it just, if I'd known that there were people like me then I probably wouldn't have felt so bad. And I guess also one thing I wish I'd done is accepted help more and asked for it, because people always offer to help, but sometimes they're kind of empty offerings of help, and I should have just accepted when people did do that, because it's hard, and it's hard to kind of admit that you need help, but at the same time I realized I should have done it because I was just exhausting myself, so they had to stop it. I only had 8 cycles in the end. I was supposed to be on it indefinitely, palliatively, whatever. And my first scan showed that it had shrunk a lot, and my blood work, I don't know if you guys know about, but in the bowel cancer, some of the CEA is measured in bowel cancers, and with me it was a good indicator of how things were going. So mine was like, when I was first diagnosed, it was like 7,000 or something, kind of off the charts. Yeah. And then the chemo had got it down to I think like 650, something like that, after my first scan. So they're like, yeah, great, everything's going. And then after that, I just went rapidly downhill. And I had the last chemo session on New Year's Eve of that year, 2018. And then the next week I ended up in hospital, because that was like my last one, basically. I couldn't eat anything. I couldn't keep anything down. And I'd become so sick that they had to like squeeze stuff into my mouth to get some nutrition into me, and put me on IV fluids, because I was really bad. So, and that scan also from that week showed that I then had progression too. So when I was diagnosed, they staged me at stage 4, because that I had all the tests for the Crohn's disease, so they could see where it spread to, and it was multiple lesions in my liver, all throughout my torso, all my lymph nodes. Well, not all of them, but a lot of them. I think like 25 or something. It spread up to my neck, because you could actually feel it in my neck here, and that was so that was it. But that was it, for as in it spread to my liver and my lymph nodes, no other organs. And so the tumor was quite a big, like tennis ball size, I guess. So after the surgery, because we obviously had that time from me having the surgery before I started my treatment, my husband kind of was looking into what else we could do, and he'd read about immunotherapy, and it had been kind of successful in the States, and so he's looking into that, and we could try and see if we can fund it to go to, because we could go to Germany and get it done over there. I talked to my oncologist before I started the chemo, and he brought it up to him then, and he said, well, he said he'll look into it, but he said because of how far off in the distance it is treatment wise, I basically wouldn't be alive by the time it would be available. So we kind of put that on okay, we need to figure out how we can go and fund it, because we'd either have to go to Germany or see how we could afford it, because it's like £150,000 to get this treatment if we're going to fund it ourselves. So we looked into that, and then when the chemo failed, I met with him, and he said that now it's done that, he'd been basically working behind the scenes with a different oncologist who was looking for someone like me with the BRAF mutation, because I'm also MSI, which means microsatellite instability, and most bowel cancer patients are MSS, which means microsatellite stable. I am not entirely sure how these things, what they mean. I mean, I know what they mean, but I don't know how it works, in why immunotherapy works for people who are MSI. But that's generally what they figured out. And so I am MSI as well as BRAF. So this oncologist was looking for people like me because they'd tested the immunotherapy in melanoma patients, and there was something that we have similar, like that might be able to work. And they were working with this drug company, Bristol Myers Squibb, and I could get the immunotherapy on compassionate use if all my other treatment options had failed. So my oncologist knew this, he just didn't tell me until it did fail. And that was literally, at the time, that was the only treatment available for BRAF mutation. That was available on the NHS. So he said, well, now it's failed, he can actually refer me to get the immunotherapy. So that's kind of how that happened. I then had to move to the other oncologist, which was at a further away hospital. And the drugs were called nivolumab and ipilimumab. In the States, they're called something different. I think it's Opdivo, Yervoy and Opdivo, I think something like that. So the plan was to have both those drugs for 4 cycles, and then after the 4 cycles, I'd just moved down to just nivolumab. So I had the first cycles were every 3 weeks, and then moved down to the nivolumab, which was every 2 weeks. I was told that because of like the newness of everything, they didn't know how it was going to affect me. They said because I'm having the dual drug, I had double the chance of getting any autoimmune disease, like 20%, I can't remember, 40% I think it was, chance of getting any autoimmune disease, because it's such a strong drug. And it could happen at any point. So basically they had to kind of check my bloods every time and check everything, and if I noticed anything different about myself, I had to kind of report it with them. And then they were reporting their findings back to the drug company. So it was kind of, they were still learning stuff. And yeah, so that was it. And I mean, the immunotherapy compared to the chemo was just like night and day. I didn't, I was only there for a couple hours and that was it. I mean, the infusion was only like an hour and a half, 2 hours, the first one. And then it eventually dwindled down to like an hour. And I could drive out of there. Like with my chemo, I couldn't drive out the hospital. I was just like barely moving. But the immunotherapy, I felt a little bit sick, and a bit tired, but that was it really. So how it kind of worked out was I'd been on immunotherapy for 2 years. They didn't really know where to go with it, because there weren't many people in front of me. But they knew that when it was getting to the 2-year mark. So I asked my oncologist if I could get a PET scan, because they don't do PET scans so much over here. And he wouldn't do it at first. And then I was like, right, look, this is what, like, I found out these people had this. So he agreed eventually. I had the PET scan, and he called me up like the next day and said, there's nothing showing on your PET scan. Like, there's no cancerous cells anywhere. So it looks like those are dead tumors, and we think that your lymph nodes are probably filled with like white blood cells, and that's why they're shown on the CT scans. So he didn't really, at that point, there wasn't really a defining moment of being like, yes, you're cancer free. The only moment I can kind of say that did happen was after I had my liver surgery. They had the biopsy results back because he wanted to wait to make sure, because sometimes when they cut them out, there can still be cancerous cells in the middle. And he said they didn't find anything. There was nothing there. And he's like, I can tell you now that means you're cancer free. And that was like the moment that I was like, wow. So it was a great feeling. Like, I was really happy at the time. And then when I came out of the hospital, I went and sat in my car and I called my husband, and then I cried. And that was probably the first time I cried some relief, because it was yeah, it was just unbelievable, really. I'd say my overall message would be for everyone to appreciate and enjoy their life, because we're all so busy doing things and thinking that we're living when we're really not. And you don't want something like a terminal cancer diagnosis to make you realize that, which sadly it does take that a lot for a lot of people. And it's not until you get to this point that you realize how much we're not living and how much we should be enjoying everything and everyone, and just to be kinder to each other and enjoy.